When the ultimate demon slayer crashes into a universe of heroes, two worlds collide in blood and fire. The Avengers have faced gods and monsters, but nothing like this green-armored harbinger of destruction who brings hell in his wake. Every realm he touches burns, and now Manhattan trembles as ancient evils slip through the cracks he's made. What happens when Earth's mightiest heroes realize the greater threat isn't the man they're fighting, but what's following him through the void? The rift opened above Manhattan with a sound like the universe tearing, a crimson wound in reality that bled fire and screaming metal into the afternoon sky. Citizens stopped, phones raised to capture the anomaly, unaware that this was not one of their world's familiar catastrophes. This was older, deeper. The Avengers alert system registered the dimensional breach at 2:47 p.m. energy signatures unlike anything in the database. Tony Stark's algorithms classified it as Dormammu adjacent but wrong in ways the system couldn't articulate. Friday sent priority alerts to all active members, but by the time Iron Man reached the airspace above Midtown, something had already emerged from the portal. A single figure fell through flame, striking the concrete of Times Square with such force that the ground cratered beneath him. He rose slowly from one knee, a mountain of scarred green armor and ancient sigils, surrounded by the wreckage of taxis and digital billboards. Steam rose from his shoulders. Blood that was not his own dried on his gauntlets. The figure stood motionless, scanning, calculating, as civilians backed away from the spreading cracks in the pavement. "Sir, I'm detecting weaponry beyond anything in our registry," Friday reported as Iron Man hovered above. "And the armor appears to be running on an energy source I cannot classify." Inside his helmet, Tony frowned. "Asgardian? Kree?" "Negative. The radiation signature is..." "Sir, it's closest to what Dr. Strange catalogued as infernal." The armored figure's helmet turned upward, locking onto Iron Man with a gaze hidden behind an impassive visor. For 3 heartbeats, neither moved. Then the stranger's hand dropped to his side, drawing a weapon that hummed with unnatural energy. "Hey there, big guy," Tony called through his external speakers. "Whatever you're selling, we're not interested. How about we talk about getting you back through that hellmouth before..." The figure fired. A burst of superheated plasma streaked past Iron Man's head, missing by inches and striking something behind him. Tony spun to see a creature he hadn't detected, a twisted mass of flesh and metal that had been slipping down the side of a building toward him. The blast tore it in half, splattering the glass facade with steaming viscera. "What the hell?" Tony whispered, then turned back to find the armored stranger already moving, sprinting with impossible speed toward the entrance to the subway. "Sir, I'm detecting more breaches. Smaller ones. All over the city." The Slayer didn't pause to consider the flying man in red armor. He had recognized the corruption immediately. The portal had worked as intended, delivering him where the infestation was spreading. This world might have different defenders, different rules, but the stink of hell was universal. His visor tracked multiple incursion points across the sprawling city. The Hells were opportunistic, using his dimensional jump as cover for their own invasion. He had 3 minutes before the demons would establish a beachhead, 7 before they'd corrupt a focal point for a larger gate. The Praetor suit's systems calibrated to the dimensional variances of this reality, adjusting his weaponry for maximum effect. The super shotgun felt heavy against his back, a promise waiting to be kept. He descended into the subway, following the distant screams and the scorched trail of argent energy that his visor highlighted in pulsing red. Behind him, the flying defender was speaking into some communication device, summoning others. Good, they would need all the help they could gather, but they would need to be fast, and they would need to understand what they faced. Few ever did, until it was too late. The platform beneath 42nd Street had already been transformed, flesh-like growths pulsing across the tiles, spreading from a tear in reality no larger than a doorway. Corrupted humans, their eyes glowing with hellish light, turned as one when the Slayer entered. These were newly taken, not yet fully transformed into the cannon fodder of the demonic legions. They charged, and the Slayer's super shotgun roared in the confined space, a sound like mountains breaking. Bodies fell, blood painted the curved ceiling. The hook attachment fired, embedding in the chest of a larger possessed that had once been a transit officer. The Slayer retracted the chain, yanking the creature toward him before splitting its skull with a single contemptuous blow. 5 seconds. 9 corpses. The small hell rift pulsed, and the Slayer approached methodically, switching to the plasma rifle. He needed to cauterize this wound before... That's far enough. The voice came from behind, feminine but steel-edged with authority. The Slayer didn't turn immediately. He fired a concentrated plasma burst into the center of the rift, causing it to spasm and contract. Only then did he acknowledge the red-haired woman in the black tactical suit, pointing twin pistols at his head. "Stand down and identify yourself," Black Widow commanded, her expression professionally neutral despite the carnage surrounding them. "We have the station surrounded." The Slayer's helmet tilted slightly. His visor scanned her, finding no trace of demonic corruption, but also no capability to stop what was coming. He gestured to the rift, now shrinking but still active, then pointed to his chest and shook his head once. "Not you," she translated, eyes narrowing. "You're saying you didn't cause this?" He nodded once, then pointed to the rift again, mimicking an explosion with his free hand. "Natasha, what's happening down there?" Captain America's voice came through her calm. "Our visitor is trying to communicate," she replied, never taking her eyes off the armored giant. "I think he's..." The ground shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling as a distant explosion echoed through the tunnels. The Slayer's posture changed instantly, coiled energy becoming directed purpose. He checked the digital counter on his plasma rifle, then pushed past Black Widow toward the source of the explosion. "He's on the move," she reported, following at a distance. "Heading north through the tunnels." "And Steve? I don't think he's our enemy." "How can you be sure?" Black Widow looked at the cauterized Hellgate, already reduced to a dwindling ember of unnatural energy, then at the bodies of the possessed, their corrupted flesh now visible as the demonic influence faded in death. "Because I think he's hunting the same things we are." 3 stations north, beneath Grand Central, Captain America encountered the Slayer in combat with something that defied description. A floating mass of flesh and mechanical components, its single eye burning with malevolent intelligence as it launched volleys of plasma from cannons grafted to what might have once been arms. The cacodemon had cornered a group of civilians, hovering between them and the exit. The Slayer was engaging it with methodical precision, dodging energy blasts while switching between weapons with practiced speed. Steve Rogers took in the situation instantly. Civilians trapped, unknown hostile. Our armored friend trying to stop it. He flung his shield, the vibranium disc slicing through the air to strike the floating monstrosity in what passed for its face. The creature turned with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, giving the Slayer the opening he needed. The super shotgun's medhook fired, embedding in the cacodemon's flesh and pulling the Slayer toward it in a controlled arc. At the apex of his flight, he shoved the barrel deep into the demon's maw and pulled the trigger. The back of the creature's head exploded outward in a spray of tissue and mechanical debris. The massive corpse crashed to the ground, twitching once before falling still. The Slayer landed beside it, stomping its remaining eye beneath his boot with a sickening crunch. Captain America stared, shield returning to his hand automatically. That was efficient. The Slayer turned toward him, blood dripping from his armor. For a moment, the 2 warriors assessed each other. Then the Slayer nodded once in acknowledgement, a soldier recognizing another. "I'm Steve Rogers," Captain America said, stepping forward, "and I think we need to talk." The Slayer said nothing, but he did not advance on the star-spangled man. Instead, he knelt beside the cacodemon corpse, using a blade to extract something from its remains. A small, pulsing shard of reddish crystal that emitted a faint glow. "What is that?" Steve asked. The Slayer held it up, then pointed to the ceiling, then dragged his thumb across his throat in a cutting motion. "It's what they want. It's why they're here. A nod. The Slayer secured the shard in a compartment on his belt, then made a spreading gesture with his hands, followed by bringing his fists together violently. They're scattered but converging, Rogers interpreted, impressed by the efficiency of the communication. Converging where? The Slayer pointed at his wrist, where a human would wear a watch, then held up 7 fingers. 7 hours, Steve said grimly. And then what? The Slayer simply stared back, the impassive visor revealing nothing. But the massive shotgun in his hands said enough. At Avengers Tower, Doctor Strange moved his hands in intricate patterns, golden sigils flaring around the central holographic display where Tony Stark and Bruce Banner were analyzing data from the dimensional breach. The sorcerer's face was drawn with concern. "These aren't random incursions," Strange said, his cloak swirling around him as if agitated by unseen currents. "They follow a pattern I've seen in ancient warnings, the convergence of spheres." In English, "Harry Potter," Tony said, manipulating a 3D map of New York where red dots indicated confirmed sightings of what the media was already calling techno-demons. "It's a coordinated invasion," Strange clarified, irritation flashing across his features. "These smaller breaches are preparing the way for something larger. They're establishing a resonance pattern." "Like tuning forks," Banner suggested, removing his glasses. "Each incursion adjusts the dimensional frequency until our reality becomes permeable to theirs on a massive scale." Strange finished. "I've been monitoring dimensional anomalies for months. Something has been systematically testing the barriers between realms." The elevator doors opened and Captain America entered with Black Widow. Behind them came the Slayer, his massive frame seeming to fill the space with coiled violence. The assembled Avengers tensed, but Steve raised a hand. "He's on our side. He can't or won't speak, but he's fighting these things. And he knows what they're after." The Slayer surveyed the room, his visor lingering on Strange, whose mystical aura registered on his suit's sensors as a potential threat. Then he approached the holographic display, studied it for a moment, and reached into a compartment on his belt. He placed the Argent shard on the scanning platform beside the display. Immediately, the tower's systems began to analyze it, holographic data expanding around the crystal. "Friday, what am I looking at?" Tony asked, fascinated by the readings. "The object appears to be crystallized energy, sir, emitting radiation on wavelengths not currently catalogued in any known spectrum. It contains approximately 800 terajoules of potential energy. That's enough to power all of Manhattan for a year," Banner whispered. The Slayer pointed to the red dots on the map, then to the crystal, then made a gathering motion with his hands. "They're collecting these," Natasha translated. "Harvesting them." "For what purpose?" Strange asked, addressing the Slayer directly, sorcerer to warrior. The Slayer's response was to make a portal-shaped gesture with his hands, then slowly widen it while mimicking an explosion. "A bigger doorway," Tony said. "They're building a bigger doorway." He turned to the armored stranger. "And you? You're what, the exterminator? You just happened to drop in when these things showed up?" The Slayer shook his head once. He pointed to his chest, then pointed to the shard, then made a fist. "Mine," the gesture said. "I came for what is mine. The energy belongs to his world." Strange interpreted, his eyes narrowing as he studied the Slayer's aura. "And I suspect he belongs to a plane that has been fighting these entities for a very, very long time." The Slayer nodded once, a confirmation that required no words. "So, we have a silent ally from another dimension who hunts techno-demons, who are themselves trying to harvest enough energy to open a permanent gateway between our worlds," Tony summarized. "Sounds like a Tuesday. Question is, what's the plan?" The Slayer turned to the map, studying it with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. After a moment, he pointed to 7 locations where the red dots clustered most densely, then dragged his finger in lines connecting them. The pattern formed a rough septagram across the city. "A ritual pattern," Strange confirmed, his expression darkening. "They're not just building a door. They're consecrating ground." The Slayer nodded, then pointed to the center of the pattern. "Central Park. That's where they'll attempt to establish their primary portal," Steve said, understanding immediately. "How much time do we have?" The Slayer held up 6 fingers. 6 hours until they complete whatever ritual they're performing," Banner said. "We need to hit all 7 points simultaneously to disrupt it. And we need to make sure whatever comes through that central portal doesn't live to regret it." Tony added, already mentally cycling through his available armors. He glanced at the Slayer. "I'm guessing you have experience with that part." The Slayer simply checked his ammunition, the gesture answer enough. The plan came together with military precision. The Avengers would split into teams to assault the 7 convergence points identified across Manhattan, while the Slayer would be positioned at Central Park with heavy support, ready to confront whatever emerged from the main portal. As the others prepared, the Slayer retreated to a corner of the lab, methodically checking his weapons. "Doctor," Strange approached cautiously, aware that the armored warrior's visor tracked his every movement. "You exist between worlds," Strange said quietly. "I can sense it. Your armor bears marks of dimensional travel, and your aura." He paused, searching for words. "It resonates with a frequency I've only felt in the deepest, oldest planes of existence." The Slayer said nothing, continuing his preparations. "These entities you hunt," Strange continued, "they've invaded multiple realities, haven't they? And you follow." The Slayer paused, then gave a single nod. The Ancient One spoke of a warrior who traversed the dark multiverse, a sentinel against forces that would consume all creation, a man who became something more. Strange's eyes narrowed. "How many worlds have you saved? How many have you watched fall?" For a long moment, the Slayer was still. Then he raised his hand, opening and closing his fist repeatedly until he stopped, as if the count were too high to continue. "And still you fight," Strange whispered, "without rest, without end." The Slayer turned back to his weapons, the conversation over. But as he moved away, Strange noticed something he hadn't seen before. Etched into the backplate of the Praetor suit, beneath layers of scorch marks and battle damage, was a symbol, one that appeared in the oldest texts of the mystic arts, representing a concept that transcended language: perpetual doom, eternal salvation. The first of the convergence points was a subway maintenance tunnel beneath the financial district. Hawkeye and Black Widow infiltrated through the ventilation system, emerging into a chamber that had been transformed by the demonic presence. Pulsating flesh merged with the concrete walls, and the air smelled of copper and ozone. "I've seen some ugly redecorating jobs, but this takes the cake," Clint muttered, knocking an arrow as they advanced. Strange said to look for a focal object. Natasha replied, her pistols ready. "Something that doesn't belong in this reality." They didn't have to search long. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a column of reddish energy, floated a crystalline structure similar to the shard the Slayer had recovered, but much larger. Around it, 3 figures in tattered business attire moved in slow, unnatural patterns, their eyes glowing with internal fire. "Those aren't people anymore," Hawkeye observed grimly. "At least, not entirely." "The Slayer didn't hesitate with the corrupted civilians in the subway," Natasha reminded him. "He might know something we don't." "Maybe, but we do things our way first," Hawkeye drew and released in one fluid motion. The arrow struck the nearest possessed human in the shoulder, releasing an electrical charge that dropped the figure to the ground, convulsing. The other 2 turned instantly, their movements jerky and uncoordinated like puppets with tangled strings. Their mouths opened simultaneously, emitting a high-pitched sound that made Natasha's teeth ache. "They're calling for help," she realized, opening fire. Her bullets struck true, but the possessed barely reacted, continuing their eerie alarm as they advanced. From the tunnels beyond, something answered, a heavy, thudding gate approaching rapidly. "Company coming," Hawkeye warned, firing a grappling arrow to reach a better vantage point. And it sounds big. He was right. The creature that emerged from the darkness stood nearly 9 feet tall, a grotesque fusion of flesh, bone, and metal. Its arms terminated in wicked blades, and its chest housed what appeared to be a furnace, glowing with internal heat. Hell Knight, Natasha identified, recalling the Slayer's crude bestiary sketches. Aim for the exposed flesh between the armor plates. The Hell Knight charged, faster than something its size had any right to move. Natasha rolled aside as it crashed into the spot where she'd stood, concrete splintering beneath its weight. Hawkeye loosed 3 arrows in rapid succession, each finding its mark in the creature's unprotected joints. The demon roared in pain and fury, turning its attention upward. It leapt, covering an impossible distance, claws outstretched toward the archer. Hawkeye dropped, using his grappling line to control his fall, barely avoiding the monster's grasp. As he descended, he fired point-blank into its face with an explosive-tipped arrow. The detonation rocked the chamber, sending the Hell Knight staggering backward. "The crystal!" Natasha shouted, engaging the remaining possessed. "Destroy it!" Clint landed, rolled, and came up with a specialized arrow, one of Stark's prototypes, designed to disrupt energy fields. He took aim at the floating crystal and let fly. The arrow struck true, penetrating the energy column to embed itself in the crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then hairline fractures appeared, spreading rapidly across its surface. The Hell Knight screamed, abandoning its attack on the Avengers to lunge toward the destabilizing focus. Down. Hawkeye tackled Natasha as the crystal shattered with a concussive force that shook the entire tunnel system. A wave of crimson energy washed outward, dissolving the fleshy growths and leaving only scorched concrete in its wake. When the dust settled, the Hell Knight lay motionless, its body already deteriorating into ash. The possessed humans had collapsed, the hellish light fading from their eyes. Natasha tapped her comm. Convergence Point 1 neutralized. Across the city, similar battles unfolded as the Avengers confronted the demonic incursions. Iron Man and War Machine descended upon an abandoned warehouse in Queens where a nest of revenants had established a foothold. Their coordinated assault of repulsor blasts and smart missiles made short work of the demons, allowing them to destroy the Argent focus. In Harlem, Thor confronted a pair of mancubi whose flesh-bound flame cannons proved little match for Mjolnir's lightning. The Thunder God's face was grim as he smashed the crystal focal point, understanding now the nature of the enemy they faced. These creatures, he communicated to the others. I have seen their like before, in the oldest Asgardian texts. They are the consumption, the endless hunger. They existed before Yggdrasil took root. At the Brooklyn Convergence Point, Captain America and Falcon found themselves outmatched by a swarm of smaller demons coordinated by a floating, skeletal sorcerer that Steve's comm identified as an archvile. The creature's flame attacks kept them pinned down until Sam executed a daring aerial maneuver, drawing its fire while Cap's shield severed the demon's hands, neutralizing its casting ability. "These things adapt," Sam reported, nursing a burned arm as they destroyed the focal crystal. "They analyzed our attack patterns and adjusted. They're not just monsters, they're tactical." One by one, the convergence points were neutralized. But with each victory, the remaining focal points grew stronger, channeling more energy toward the central location. And as the power concentrated, something began to stir in, the void between dimensions, aware now of the world ripe for conquest. In the skies above Central Park, the rift began to widen, hours ahead of schedule. At Avengers Tower, Dr. Banner monitored the energy readings with increasing alarm. "They're accelerating the process," he reported to Strange, who was maintaining a protective ward around the building. "The convergence is happening now." Strange's expression darkened. "They're adapting to our interference." "Where is the Slayer?" "Already en route to the park with the secondary team," Banner replied. "But the readings I'm getting, this is bigger than we anticipated." "Much bigger." In the Quinjet speeding toward Central Park, the Slayer stood motionless, gripping a handhold as the aircraft banked sharply to avoid civilian buildings. Beside him, Scarlet Witch watched with curiosity and unease. "You've faced these creatures before," she said, not expecting an answer. "I can sense your history with them. The hatred. The purpose. The—" Slayer's helmet turned slightly toward her. "There's something more," she continued, her eyes taking on a reddish glow as her powers brushed against his consciousness. "A loss. Something they took from you." The Slayer's posture stiffened, his free hand clenching into a fist. "I'm sorry," Wanda said, withdrawing her psychic touch. "I didn't mean to intrude. But you should know, I understand what it means to have a purpose born from loss. To be defined by what was taken." The Quinjet banked again, and through the viewport they could see the park below. The once green expanse was now marred by a swirling vortex of crimson energy that hovered 50 feet above Bethesda Fountain. Lightning-like discharges of argent power struck the ground, scorching patterns into the earth that formed complex, blasphemous geometries. And surrounding the fountain, hundreds of possessed civilians moved in unison, arms raised toward the growing rift, their voices joined in an inhuman chorus. "My God," Vision said from the pilot's seat. "They're using the civilians as a ritual anchor. Can we disrupt it without harming them?" Wanda asked, her powers already gathering around her fingertips. The Slayer's answer was to move toward the rear hatch, checking his super shotgun one final time. His visor scanned the growing portal, identifying the frequency signature. This was no random incursion. This was targeted, coordinated. The same pattern he had followed across 3 dimensions before arriving here. They were following him, hunting him. And now this world would suffer for his presence. The Slayer reached to his side, activating the crucible. The blade hummed to life, a shaft of focused argent energy that cast his armor in a crimson glow. Wanda took an involuntary step back, sensing the weapon's nature a thing designed for a single, terrible purpose. "That blade," she whispered, "it's made from their own energy." The Slayer nodded once, then turned to the hatch controls. There was no time for a gentle approach. The possessed were already lost, their souls consumed to fuel the ritual. What remained were merely vessels for Hell's will. Vision understood the Slayer's intent immediately. "Wait," he began, "we should coordinate with the others." The Slayer hit the release, and the hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss. Wind rushed into the cabin as the Quinjet hovered 100 feet above the chaos. Without hesitation, the Slayer leapt into the void. He fell like a comet, the crucible leaving a trail of burning light. He struck the ground at the edge of the gathered possessed, the impact creating a shockwave that sent dozens of them flying backward. Before the dust settled, he was moving, the blade cutting through corrupted flesh with mechanical precision. Each stroke severed the connection between the ritual participants and the growing portal. Each kill weakened Hell's grip on this reality. The Slayer moved like a force of nature, relentless and methodical, his every movement calculated for maximum efficiency. Above, Wanda watched in horror and reluctant understanding. "He's breaking the circuit," she said to Vision, "destroying the conduits to weaken the portal." "At what cost?" Vision asked, his synthetic features troubled. "The cost he's always paid," Wanda replied softly. "His humanity." The Slayer carved a path toward the fountain, where the concentration of energy was strongest. As the possessed fell, the portal above pulsed and contracted, its expansion momentarily halted by the disruption of the ritual. But the dimensional tear had already grown large enough for what waited on the other side. A massive claw emerged from the rift, tearing at the fabric of reality to widen the opening. Behind it came a horned head the size of a bus, its eyes burning with infernal intelligence and ancient malice. The creature pulled itself halfway through the portal, its upper body suspended above the park while legs like twisted cathedral pillars dangled from the rift. "The cyber demon," Wanda breathed, recalling the Slayer's crude warning sketches. "Their general." the monster roared, a sound that shattered windows for blocks in every direction and sent birds fleeing from trees across the city. It raised an arm that terminated not in a hand but in a massive cannon, energy gathering at its muzzle. The Slayer didn't break stride, switching from the Crucible to the BFG 9,000 inches one fluid motion. The weapon hummed as it charged, drawing power from his suit's reserves. The Cyberdemon fired first, a stream of concentrated plasma that tore through the earth where the Slayer had stood a split second earlier. The armored warrior rolled aside, came up on one knee, and returned fire. The BFG projectile streaked upward, a ball of swirling green energy that struck the demon's chest with devastating force. The explosion illuminated the entire park, briefly turning night to day. The Cyberdemon roared in pain and fury as the blast tore away, chunks of its armored hide, exposing the mechanized components beneath. The Slayer was already moving again, switching back to the super shotgun, as smaller demons began to pour through the weakened but still active portal. Imps and Hell Knights descended upon the park, their claws and fangs ready to rend flesh. Above, the Quinjet's weapons systems engaged, Vision and Wonder providing covering fire as the Slayer fought his way toward the fountain. Iron Man and War Machine arrived moments later, their repulsors adding to the barrage directed at the emerging demon horde. The civilians! Captain America's voice came through the comm as he arrived on the scene with the others. Focus on getting the civilians clear. But the Slayer had already made his choice. The possessed were beyond saving, and every moment spent on rescue was a moment the portal grew stronger. He charged toward the Cyberdemon, dodging energy blasts and leaping over smaller demons with single-minded purpose. The BFG had wounded the massive creature, but it remained half-emerged from the portal, using its position to direct the smaller demons like a general commanding troops. It spotted the approaching Slayer and fired again, the blast catching him mid-leap and sending him crashing through a copse of trees. For a moment, the armored warrior lay still among the splintered trunks. The Cyberdemon roared in triumph, turning its attention to the arriving Avengers who were engaging its minions with impressive coordination but limited understanding of what they faced. Thor hurled Mjolnir at the demon's face, the enchanted hammer striking with a thunderclap that rocked the massive creature. Foul beast. The Asgardian bellowed. Return to whatever hell spawned you. The Cyberdemon snatched Mjolnir from the air on its return path, the hammer's magic briefly contested by the creature's own dimensional power. With a snarl of effort, it hurled the weapon aside, sending it crashing through Central Park's northern face with devastating force. Thor stood momentarily stunned, his connection to Mjolnir strained by the demon's interference. The Cyberdemon seized the opportunity, its cannon arm leveling at the Thunder God. A streak of green armor intercepted the blast. The Slayer had recovered, throwing himself into the path of the energy beam that would have vaporized Thor. His Praetor suit's shields flared and overloaded, circuits burning out as they absorbed the impossible energy. The Slayer crashed to the ground, his armor smoking and portions of the chest plate blackened beyond recognition. Still, he rose, switching to the ballista with mechanical determination. The weapon deployed with a pneumatic hiss, its specialized ammunition designed for penetrating the thickest demonic hide. Thor watched in amazement as the warrior who had saved him immediately returned to the fight without acknowledgement or hesitation. "A true berserker," he murmured, calling Mjolnir back to his hand. The ballista fired, its projectile punching through the Cyberdemon's remaining armor to embed deep in the creature's shoulder joint. The demon roared, its cannon arm momentarily disabled by the precision shot. "Now, Asgardian." The Slayer's electronic voice suddenly crackled through his helmet's external speakers, the words distorted and mechanical, as if forced through damaged systems. Thor didn't hesitate. He summoned the full power of lightning, channeling it through Mjolnir into the metal shaft protruding from the Cyberdemon's shoulder. Electricity arced through the creature's cybernetic systems, causing explosions along its armored frame. The Cyberdemon writhed in agony, nearly falling back through the portal. But its claws dug deeper into the edges of the dimensional tear, refusing to relinquish its foothold in this reality. The portal, Strange's voice came through the comms as he arrived on scene, mystical shields already deployed to contain the smaller demons. "We need to close it while the entity is vulnerable." Iron Man landed beside the Slayer, his armor's sensors assessing the warrior's condition. "Your suit's failing," he observed. "Power reserves at 17%. Whatever you're planning to do it fast." The Slayer nodded once, then reached into a compartment on his belt. He withdrew a small device, spherical in design with glowing sigils etched across its surface. His gauntleted fingers input a sequence, causing the sphere to pulse with increasing frequency. Tony asked, repulsors firing to keep approaching demons at bay. The Slayer didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the portal, then made an expansive gesture with his hands before bringing them together in a crushing motion. "Implosion device," Tony translated. "You're going to collapse the portal." His eyes widened behind his helmet. "But the energy release would level half of Manhattan." The Slayer nodded again, grim acknowledgement in the gesture. "There has to be another way," Tony insisted. "Strange, we need containment options." The Sorcerer Supreme appeared beside them, his hands already weaving complex patterns. "I can create a dimensional pocket to channel the explosion, but I need time to establish the parameters." The Slayer shook his head, pointing to the cyberdemon which was already recovering from Thor's lightning assault. They didn't have time. The longer the portal remained open, the stronger the demon's connection to this reality became, until not even the implosion device would be sufficient. "Let me see that," Tony said, holding out his hand for the device. "Friday, analyze the mechanism and extrapolate function." The Slayer hesitated, then surrendered the sphere. Tony examined it for less than 5 seconds before understanding bloomed in his eyes. "It's not just an implosion device. It's a dimensional anchor. You're not just trying to close the portal." The Slayer nodded once. "You're trying to drag everything back through it, including yourself." Tony looked up at the impassive visor. "That's why the voice module activated. Last-ditch systems coming online." "Stark, what are you saying?" Steve asked as he joined them, shield raised against the ongoing demonic assault. "Our friend here was planning a one-way trip," Tony explained grimly. "Detonate on the other side, seal the rift permanently." He turned back to the Slayer. "But we don't sacrifice people, not even interdimensional demon hunters. We find another way." The Slayer's posture conveyed skepticism, but he did not attempt to reclaim the device. Instead, he checked his remaining ammunition, preparing to continue the fight while the Avengers developed their alternative. "I need 3 minutes," Strange decided, already beginning to channel mystical energy. "Can you give me 3 minutes?" The Slayer's answer was to advance toward the cyberdemon, switching to the chain gun. The belt-fed weapon spun up with a mechanical growl, then unleashed a torrent of specialized ammunition designed to penetrate demonic armor. The bullets struck the creature's exposed cybernetics, causing cascading system failures across its massive frame. The demon general roared in fury, focusing all its attention on the approaching threat. It recognized the Slayer, ancient enemy, eternal hunter. With a gesture, it commanded all its forces to converge on the armored warrior, abandoning their attacks on the other defenders. "They're focusing on him," Natasha observed as the demons broke off their engagement. "They hate him specifically. Or fear him," Thor countered, watching the Slayer advance into the heart of the demonic horde, weapons blazing without hesitation. For 2 minutes and 17 seconds, the Slayer became the center of a hurricane of violence. Demons fell by the dozens as he switched between weapons with practiced efficiency, never stopping, never faltering despite the damage to his armor. The super shotgun roared, the plasma rifle hummed, the chainsaw screamed through corrupted flesh. The Avengers provided supporting fire from the perimeter, picking off demons that managed to flank the Slayer. But the bulk of Hell's fury was directed at the green-armored warrior who had hunted them across dimensions. 30 seconds, Strange called out, the mystical construct taking shape around the portal. "I need him clear of the focal point." The cyberdemon, sensing the sorcerer's interference, gave a roar of defiance. Its cannon arm, partially repaired by hellish energies, swiveled towards Strange. Energy gathered at the muzzle, building to a destructive crescendo. The Slayer saw the threat and calculated instantly. His suit's power reserves were nearly depleted, shield systems offline. The distance too great to intercept physically. He made his choice. The BFG came up one final time, drawing the last of his power reserves. The weapon charged, glowing with building energy as the Slayer took careful aim. He fired not at the cyberdemon, but at the space between it and Doctor Strange. The energy ball detonated precisely where he'd intended, the explosion creating a momentary barrier that absorbed the cyberdemon's blast. The force of the dual explosion sent the Slayer flying backward, his armor smoking from the proximity to his own weapon's discharge. "Now, Strange," Tony shouted. The Sorcerer Supreme completed his spell, golden energy lancing from his hands to encircle the portal. The mystical construct contracted, forcing the dimensional tier to begin closing from the edges inward. The cyber-demon roared in fury and desperation, claws digging deeper into reality as it fought against the closing portal. It began to pull itself fully through, its lower body emerging from the rift before it could close completely. "It's coming through," Steve warned. "All units, focus fire." The Avengers unleashed everything they had: repulsor blasts, lightning strikes, explosive arrows, energy beams from Vision's Mind Stone. The combined assault staggered the demon but didn't stop its emergence. And then the Slayer was there. His armor cracked and failing, portions of the helmet shattered to reveal a glimpse of scarred human flesh beneath. He sprinted toward the partially emerged demon, the crucible blazing in his hand one final time. With a leap that defied human limitations, the Slayer landed on the cyberdemon's chest. The creature's 6 eyes widened in recognition and something approaching fear. Before it could react, the crucible plunged deep into its central core, the blade of concentrated argent energy severing connections between flesh, metal, and the hellish power that animated both. The cyberdemon convulsed, internal systems failing catastrophically. As it thrashed in its death throes, the Slayer planted a foot on its massive head and pushed off, propelling himself back through the rapidly closing portal. "Wait!" Tony shouted, realizing the warrior's intent. The implosion device. But it was too late. The Slayer vanished through the rift, dragging the dying cyberdemon with him back to the hell from which it came. The portal contracted to a pinpoint of crimson light, then winked out of existence with a sound like thunder. In the sudden silence that followed, the Avengers stood amid the carnage of Central Park, the bodies of demons already dissolving into ash as their connection to their home dimension was severed. "He went back," Steve said quietly. "Why would he?" "Because it was his mission," Strange replied, his hands falling to his sides as the mystical energies dissipated. "Not just to kill demons, but to contain the spread of their influence. He knew that as long as he remained in our dimension, they would continue to come. He sacrificed himself," Wanda whispered, "to save a world that wasn't even his own." Tony stared at the spot where the portal had been, the implosion device still clutched in his hand. "No," he said finally. He went home, back to his war. He looked down at the sphere, its sigils now dark and inert. "And he left this with us, insurance, in case they ever find their way back." Thor approached, Mjolnir hanging loosely at his side. The Thunder God's expression was solemn, respectful. "I have fought alongside the greatest warriors of 9 realms," he said, "but I have never seen one such as him, a mortal who fights with the determination of a god. Not just a mortal anymore," Strange corrected softly. "Something the Ancient One called a Doom Knight, a being transformed by its purpose until nothing remains but the mission." He gestured to the dissolving demon corpses. "In the oldest texts, it is said that hell itself fears only one thing, the fury of a righteous man who has nothing left to lose." As dawn broke over New York, casting golden light across the devastated park, the Avengers gathered the implosion device and what little remained of the demonic technology for study and safekeeping. The city would rebuild, as it always did, with most citizens never knowing how close they had come to annihilation. But in Avengers Tower, Tony Stark worked through the night, analyzing the fragments of Argent energy and the implosion device left behind by their silent ally. On a secure server, accessible only to himself, he began a file labeled Contingency, Hellbreaker. And in the space between dimensions, the Slayer continued his eternal hunt, carrying with him the knowledge of yet another world saved from the consumption, another temporary victory in an endless war. Behind his repaired visor, eyes that had witnessed the fall of countless civilizations stared impassively into the swirling chaos of the dimensional void, searching for the next breach, the next battle. The crucible hummed at his side, hungry for the blood of demons. Rip and tear until it is done.